we gotta talk about something, and it's that free will is a meme, and you don't have it. So, anything that you could describe as free will could easily be described by physical phenomena, and you can get all the way down to the point in the brain where the synapse is happening, or you would say the thought is occurring somewhere, and that's where it gets weird. The thought is occurring somewhere in some container, and what is that? There's no physical description of that, and I think the easiest answer is to just say that means it's an undefined, non-physically described thing. So a lot of people will take that and say, okay, well, this is where we put in free will or God or the Holy Spirit or all consciousness, right? When I speak about free will, I'm essentially speaking about consciousness as well. Consciousness is, you may have heard the phrase consciousness is an illusion or something like that. It's well described physically. It's not just a philosophical claim. You have your genes in your environment. You have the genes you were born with. You have, which were also entirely determined. You have your environment, which shapes the self that you think you have. And you couldn't name another factor besides those two things. And neither of those two things are extra physical or magical. So essentially you're born into this world with a set of genes which were determined by your parents, a set of environmental factors which are determined as well. You can't choose what you're going to experience in the world. If you think that you can, then try to choose to do something that does not come from a cause. Try to choose and have an effect in the world that wasn't caused by anything. Think about that. How do you make a choice? How do you take an action in the world without something preceding it that causes you to make that action? How would that be? Anything you could ever do, if you choose between an apple and an orange, you can sit there and you can go back and forth between the two indefinitely. And if you eventually, quote unquote, decide to choose one, then that was also determined by some sort of factor in your subconscious. Your subconscious was shaped over time due to environmental factors, and everything static about it, everything that it began as, was also chosen deterministically. So you have a deterministic set of, preconditions, and then you have a whole set of stimuli, environmental factors, and you put all that together, and eventually you're sitting there going back and forth between an orange and an apple, and you choose, say, the apple. That was always determined. Fate is a real thing. People, if someone says, "Do you believe in fate? What's your sign?" Also entirely physically described. Physicalist. You can be a naturalist, physicalist, materialist, pure. You're all about science, right? And so you believe in fate, right? It sounds like it contradicts one another because the term fate is used in a way that sounds mystical and people use it in that sense, but really fate is a physically, you could flesh it out physically. Fate is a fact of the matter when it comes to physical reality unfolding. As we say, every physical phenomenon is determined by a prior cause. There's a cause and effect chain going all the way back to the Big Bang. And then once life began to exist, and then eventually intelligent life began to exist, and then eventually, right, like we just started describing ourselves as conscious with free will, there's some leap that we take. So from the Big Bang, we have a chain of events. Eventually we went from, a shitload of heat turning into eventually some sort of matter then eventually the matter was able to take a leap that created life, and then there was a leap from life to conscious beings, and then conscious beings started to think about themselves and define this chain, and then somewhere between being cooled down to be created and be turned into matter to complex states of matter, which we would call like an organism, and then complex organisms, you keep going up from, okay, we have science, right? Physics describes this, we keep going, and eventually you get to the signals, like say for light, for example, photons that are entering the eyeball, which is of no particular interest to the universe or God or whatever. There's just an eyeball where photons are traveling into the eyeball, and then in the back of the head there's receptors, there's a way for that to get transmitted into the brain and get processed by the brain. You can slow all that down, you can break all that down too. Inside the brain, that process that's happening where you have a stimulus stimulating some sort of receptor or neuroprocess, whatever. You have the thing causing the effect, then you have the effect, and that effect causes another effect, all inside the brain. When that synapse happens and when that quote-unquote experience is occurring, there's not been a change. It's still all entirely physical, right? Everything that happens in there, everyone would agree it's described by physics. But there's something that we believe emerges, or something that we believe is created or generated, which sort of then floats above or around the body, and all the physical stuff exists, but then there's something nearby and some other field that we can't perceive yet, or God bestowed it upon us, or there's a conscious field, blah blah. All of that is completely unfounded anywhere in science. 99.9% of any scientist you ask are going to tell you that yes, we have literally zero understanding of what it is to say something is conscious and perceiving of something else, right? We have nothing to say about what it means to see something that's lit up with light, aside from the fact that photons enter this boring object called an eye and gets transferred to the information gets transferred through electrical pulses in this boring mechanism up here that's all boring and physical, nothing interesting going on. All this is to say that people get excited, people get emotional, we feel special, we feel like there's something going on in there that makes us different. It's the reason we can feel love, it's the reason we feel compassion and empathy. Love, compassion, and empathy, hate to break it to you, all physical phenomena, all of it. The experience feels like something to you, but that's the problem in itself, is that you're the one that's trying to describe it to me. You're going to say what you think you feel back to me. And all I have to hear is a synapse happened, an experience happened. You can call it an experience, you can call it free will, you can call it consciousness. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's a category or a description that we made up that has no explanation in science compared to anything else. Anything else we can dissect and keep going smaller and smaller and start pulling apart and learning more about it. With consciousness, the reason we don't, in 2022, we don't have the groundbreaking explanation of what consciousness is and how it functions, in my opinion, is spoiler, because it never existed in the first place. All we're doing is saying, when I see, when photons occur to my eyeball and my brain, and I see objects thanks to light, it's something special. I am a being. I am a one. But why are you saying that? Where is your grounds for saying that? What is the problem for you with saying that the photon entering the eye is what's happening? Why is there a problem with saying that when the wave of of air molecules vibrating in the air called sound entering the ear, it goes and gets processed by the brain. What's your problem with saying that that occurrence is entirely physical, entirely explainable by physics and neuroscience, obviously, which is extrapolating on physics and saying this is the physics that's going on inside the brain, right? Physics and chemistry, neurochemistry. What's the problem with saying that photons entering an eyeball or vibrating air molecules bouncing into the receptor that's going on in the ear and making that process get explained by the brain to something, right? What is the problem with saying that there's no experience being experienced by a one? There only is a photon entering, sound wave entering. Where do you think that it's going to? It's being processed by a brain. That's all an allowed statement, but it's not being processed by a you or a one. It's not. One is not processing it. One is not understanding, right? The color red, compared one person compared to another. The right direction, I guess, a step in the right direction would be to say that consciousness, you don't have consciousness, but that you are consciousness. So that's a step in the right direction to say that you are not a one that has an experience that you can explain, but rather that you and the consciousness are uniquely one thing at the same time, right? So the conscious experience is photons, light, sound getting perceived as something qualia, like vision, sight. You experienced something that you saw, you experienced something that you heard. It's a way to get your mind to go toward the thing that is the most true. And it's more true to say that you are a consciousness rather than that you have a consciousness, right? So these are the stepping stones. Still wrong, though. You are not a consciousness. You are not. You are not. Period. You are a complicated illusion generated by a complex computer like the brain, essentially where you're tricking yourself into treating yourself as something that you pilot, that you choose what next stimuli is going to come in, and you choose what next cause that you next put out to have an effect on the world. Whereas those things are all entirely systematic and determined and replicated in studies and experiments all the time, right? It's settled. It's been settled for a long, 100 years, right? Plus, we don't make the leap to say that the scientists who have described everything physically that's going on, and a huge percentage of the population that thinks that free will is a thing just because of cultural things and just sort of it being around as a cultural relic. I mean, not to mention something that you just don't want to let go of. That there's a disjunction between the fact that we've understood that everything that we would ever see a person do or think or act or be or express is all we can pinpoint where that thing is that's happening in the brain. We can pinpoint the chemical exchange. We can pinpoint the synapse. We can pinpoint the electrical exchange, right? The electrical potential and output. Why can't we bring those two things together then? We say it's all been described scientifically, and a lot of people believe they have it. Okay, it's okay though to say that, to rectify that. It's ironic because the step you have to take to solve the problem of the illusion of free will, everyone having it, the illusion of consciousness, the step to take is to do less, is to say it's all you have to do is not begin the next theory that has no evidence. That's right. Like, that's all you have to do is not do. So we have a physical explanation of the world, which everyone takes it for granted. Everyone accepts as pretty solid. We understand how everything started in the Big Bang. We understand the dynamics going forward. We understand the dynamics as they are now. We understand how things will be in a long time from now. We understand how things are really far away in space. Understand how things will be really far away in time. We have a great physical understanding of everything. We started doing that with things like chemicals, and then we started doing that with things like biology, which is complex chemical interactions. And it got to a point where somebody decided that our physical explanation that we built up upon, which was entirely sound and entirely peer-reviewed and backed up and explained further and further and better, and we invented psychology and sociology, and started to look at the dynamics between human consciousness themselves. Somewhere in there, we got lost in the sauce, and we forgot that all of the interactions going on are one person, like, so say for sociology, is one entity is communicating with another entity. Two people are interacting. All that is chemical exchange, like I said, electrical pulses in one entity occurring due to past events like genes and environment. Another one, same exact things happening. The two exchanging between each other thoughts and ideas and trading and speaking language to each other. Nothing magic about that either. It just becomes so complex, right? So, since we don't understand, exactly we can't completely predict somebody's next action because the complexity of one brain is so crazy, and then that person's interacting with another human who we can't predict their next action because it's so complex in there. Then the interaction between those two is multiplicative, right, or exponentially complex, and it's just like, man, that is so complex that there must be something there. There must be, but everybody wants to take that little leap. Everybody I feel like everyone since forever, right, in each individual that's watching this has had that feeling forever, and maybe they've heard a few things about how you could debunk it, and how maybe they've seen a YouTube video or two that says free will is an illusion, blah blah blah, and it's a fun thought experiment. But to me, it's like so blatantly true, it becomes obsessive. To the point where I want to make a YouTube video, because it's astounding to see how dug in people can be on such a thing, where you can find a person who will agree with all my premises, will say, yes, everything's physical from the Big Bang, I agree with all that, I'm an atheist, I'm a naturalist, I'm a physicalist, right? Everything. You get them to agree on every premise, and then for some reason, the physical phenomena going on inside each skull, it produces something untangible to scientists, something that can only be explained. Again, they're atheists, so can only be, cannot be explained. It's or is to be explained later, I guess, is another good point. I also don't even think when we say we're trying to understand consciousness and it's hard and we're stuck and we don't know how to completely describe it, right, in a model, we can't. We don't have a good one running. That's what you'll hear. Everyone says that. And the answer to that is because you're trying to describe, you're trying to add another layer of description to something that is already described, right? One mind interacts with the world and gets changed, and then that interacts with another mind, and that changes that mind. They each change each other. there's dynamics there that seem like, yeah, well, where's the physics in that? You know, it's between two minds. It's like the physics is one chemical composition, another chemical composition, they interact, and both of the chemical compositions are thus changed. It's solved. A lack of consciousness, a lack of free will, a lack of true experience, how we believe it in our physical world, is already solved. It is explained. And I don't know. I guess that's the end of my rant. Let me know if you agree or disagree. If you disagree, you really got to address some of the main things that I've said, because I just don't see it. There's no model. There's no nudge in the right direction. There's just, we think that we feel that we want it to be this way, and I'm not even coming after anyone. I'm just saying it's an easier life. This goes into my other videos that, I'll explain that later, but you could base your way of living and your ethics and morality and all this stuff on this truth that doesn't come from a book. It comes from a set of books. It comes from explanations of science, right? But it doesn't come from a holy book. It doesn't come from any magical thinking. Anyway, let me know what you think about this idea. Type it in the comments. Just know that as you're typing it, each keystroke was entirely determined, because your response to what I've said in this video as you're typing it is going to come from something, right? It's not come from the power of God. Your response is going to be determined by what precedes you watching this video and the video, right? And then as you're typing it, you might stop and think, is this what I want to do? And then you're going to hit backspace and go all the way back to the beginning and start typing again. As you did that, as you hit backspace, yet another, that was not your free will kicking in where you decided to do that. That was another predisposition, a preceding cause, a causal link in our cause-effect chain, which has not been debunked thus far by any other scientists. You will be typing what you were meant to type based on your genes and your environment. Anyway, so good luck with that. And this is Badra. I'm out. Peace. Thank you.